for as long as mankind can remember. The written word has served as a portal to incredible knowledge, sometimes transmitted over thousands of years. But as enlightening as books are, there are some that should never be read. There are some mystical and mysterious books that you should never even open, lest disaster happen. In today's issue, we're going to tell you about just such books that you should never read or even open, so sit back and let's begin. If you are a fan of horror movies, you may have seen Hereditary or The Nun. However, did you know that the demonic entities in these movies were taken directly from a real book? The book is known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, and it is probably the most influential grimoire or book of magic of its kind. The book is composed of 5 different texts that were written over hundreds of years and were first compiled into a collection in the 17th century, when magic was still believed to be real. Mysteriously, no one knows who authored it. All that is known is that this gruesome grimoire contains supposed spells and information on how to summon 72 demons, including King Paimon, the demon from Hereditary, and Valak, who appears in the movie The Nun. John of Marigny, a 14th century French monk, devoutly followed the teachings of one of the lesser key texts. However, instead of gaining knowledge or wisdom, he was cursed with terrible demonic visions. The monk was so traumatized that he wrote his own manuscript, warning people to stay away from this text. Even if you do not plan to dabble in magic, you should still steer clear of the lesser key. People who have read the original manuscript reported that the pages of the book turned by themselves and ghostly figures appeared to torment them. The Grand Grimoire, also known as the Gospel of Satan, is a disturbing text that was supposedly written in 1520 by a man named Honorius of Thebes, who was believed to have been possessed by the devil. This ancient book describes the price that must be paid for powerful abilities. The original Grand Grimoire is regarded as one of the darkest books ever written and is considered so dangerous that it is kept in the secret vault of the Vatican Library. Not much is known about the book's content, except that it was written in 1520, and various versions of this macabre work were later published. The Grand Grimoire outlines methods and techniques for summoning the most powerful and terrible demons to Earth. It is said that anyone who reads the Grand Grimoire sells their soul to the devil, which is why the book is deemed so perilous. The story of an orphan, or Historia del Orfano. Despite the fact that the book was written in the 17th century, it remained unpublished for 400 years, supposedly because of a curse that afflicted anyone who tried it. Spooky. When Peruvian scholar Belinda Palacios found out about the archival manuscript in 2016, she was determined to translate the handwritten words and print them for a modern audience. In addition to the original author's unsuccessful attempt to publish her work, subsequent attempts by various people ended in tragedy. One contracted a strange disease, another had an accident, and another's life was cut short by a mysterious, unknown cause. It's not very inspiring, is it? Indeed, these reports so disturbed Palacios that she asked her friend to burn the manuscript if anything happened to her. Nevertheless, she kept working on it, and her efforts paid off, and the book was officially published in 2018 and no one was hurt. So it looks like the curse is finally broken. Nevertheless, I still wouldn't risk reading it. Let a decade or so pass, then we'll know for sure. Codex Gigas, or the Devil's Bible, is an imposing tome. It stands at 3 feet tall and weighs 165 pounds, and one can only imagine the effort it must have taken to transport it to its current home, the National Library of Sweden. However, its size is not even half of what makes this book so fascinating. According to legend, in the 13th century in what is now the Czech Republic, a Benedictine monk named Hermann Hermitas was found guilty of sin and sentenced to be walled up alive. Before the last brick was laid, he begged for mercy. Then the chief monk made Hermann an offer. If he could rewrite all the knowledge of the world into one book in one night, he would be spared. Knowing it would be impossible, Herman desperately prayed to the devil for help. To his surprise, it worked. Satan appeared and agreed to write the rest of the book for him, perhaps mastering the monk's writing with superhuman speed. In exchange, he asked for only one thing, Herman's soul, and apparently a good portrait. Fair enough. The next day, the head monk checked on Herman and was amazed that the assignment had been completed. Regardless of how likely the story is, the folio itself is quite real and impressive. It contains the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, various historical accounts, and instructions for casting spells and exorcisms, among other things. However, the sheer quantity of material suggests that it could have taken at least 20 years to complete. Judging by the handwriting, the book appears to have been written by just one person in just one night. Usually, people's handwriting changes with age, but there is no evidence of that here. Moreover, the last 12 pages of the codex are torn out, leading people to suspect that they contain the very prayer that Herman used to invoke the devil. The Book of Soygo is also known as the Book of the Assassin. This book was originally written in Latin and was published in the 16th century. It is dedicated to magical rituals and spells. For a long time, the Book of Soygo was thought to be hopelessly lost, but in the 1580s, John Dee, an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I of England, acquired a copy of the book. At the time, many people believed in magic, so he thought the book might be very useful. The only problem was that the last 36 pages were written in code. Desperate to unlock the knowledge hidden in it, John worked tirelessly trying to crack the code, but nothing worked. Supposedly, he even summoned the Archangel Uriel to ask for his help. However, Uriel told him something terrible: the book was cursed, and anyone who could decipher its meaning would die within 2 years. Despite this terrible threat, John continued to try to crack the code for the rest of his life, but to no avail. Then the book mysteriously disappeared. Almost 400 years later, a historian discovered a copy of the book in a pile of dusty books in the British Library in London. Despite the book's grim reputation, cryptographers and historians set to work trying to decipher it. It took another 12 years until the code was cracked in 2006 by a man named Jim Reeds. He revealed the previously hidden names of various demons, angels, and magical spells. Fortunately, Jim is still alive and well. However, many people still believe that the curse is real and that it only affects those who truly understand the meaning of the text, rather than just reading the words. Grimoire. A grimoire is a book that describes magical rituals and instructions for casting spells. Many witches believed that the grimoire should be burned after a witch's death, so that her magical secret would remain secret. In 2013, one website held a sale of a collection of grimoires for $13,000, and the buyer and seller wished to remain anonymous. The price was due to the fact that the books belonged to a famous witch and high priestess Wicca, who lived in the 20th century. One of the grimoires contained spells for summoning evil and good spirits. There were also painted curses and recipes for potions and medicines. It's funny, but in this grimoire there was even a recipe for hairspray. Apparently magic alone is not enough to keep your hair under control. It is worth mentioning that most of the basic text in that grimoire was written using the ancient alphabet. Earlier such cipher was used to keep the secrets of witchcraft. When experts deciphered the code, they discovered that the grimoire contained the following warning: the uninitiated in the craft are forbidden to read this book. Do not proceed, or you will be caught up in the punishment and will suffer from the same craft. Don't read this aloud. Back in 1919, a seemingly ordinary poetry collection named Saken was released in Japan. The author, one Seijo Yasuo, was known for producing children's nursery rhymes, so everybody assumed this latest book would follow in the same vein. Yet nestled within its pages was a poem so twisted, so horrifying that it inspired a spine-chilling legend. The poem, called Toadies Hell, is often associated with this creepy painting that you may have seen doing the rounds on the web. The unsettling image is by mysterious Japanese artist Yuko Tatsushima, whom we know very little about. We do know her painting isn't directly related to Toadie's Hell, though, and seems to have merely been adopted as a scary accompanying visual on story sites like Creepypasta. It's definitely done the job. But what's the poem itself actually about, then? Well, it tells the bleak and traumatic story of a young child named Tomino. Supposedly, Yasuo was inspired to write it when he lost a loved one, but though the circumstances are sad, the legend around the poem is downright terrifying. Apparently, reading it out loud directly causes your demise. In 1974, Japanese poet and director Terayama Tsuji released a movie inspired by the poem, and sure enough, met his untimely end only a few years later. Many other readers are said to have passed from illness, accidents, and sudden, inexplicable causes, too. Not that everyone who reads it kicks the bucket, but there are usually consequences. Survivors of the poem's curse have complained of a lingering, eerie feeling that they just can't shake. Even if you're not a fan of spooky stuff, you might still have heard of the Necronomicon. The Necronomicon is also known by such names as the Key to Hell's Gate, the Book of Evil, the Book of the Dead, and so on. The book describes magical rituals about raising the dead. The description of the Necronomicon states that the book is dangerous to read, for it can harm the physical and mental health of the reader. That is why it is kept behind 7 locks in all libraries. The Necronomicon describes occult knowledge, information about spells, witches, the undead, demons, and the afterlife. Among other things, this book describes magical rituals, the ancient gods, Earth history, and other mysteries. The Necronomicon is considered a fictional book invented by Howard Lovecraft, a 20th century American writer who worked in the horror, mystical, and fantasy genres. Despite the fact that the book is fictional, some people believe it is real after all. Lovecraft's plots impressed people so much that they decided to create this book on their own, using all the references to it in the writer's stories themselves. Therefore, today there is a huge number of sites on the internet, where anyone who wants to read the content of this legendary work. The Necronomicon often appears in literary works based on the myths of Cthulhu, the universe that was invented by Lovecraft. In these stories, Cthulhu appears as a powerful creature who can influence the minds of humans. According to the Cthulhu myths, the author of the Necronomicon is the fictional character Abdul Alhazard, who created the book from human flesh. The Necronomicon describes in detail a variety of magical rituals and sacrifices, making it one of the creepiest and most mysterious books in the entire world, even though it was actually made up. In this issue, we will continue to explore the most enigmatic books that you should avoid reading at all costs. It can be incredibly exciting to discover a long-lost piece of literature. As recently as 2019, a religious text known as the Smuggler's Psalter was recovered after nearly 300 years in the ocean. Despite residing on a ship that had long been sunk, it was found preserved inside a tin can, meaning miraculously it's still readable. Some lost books, however, should stay lost, like the Raskina. This unassuming tome was written by an Icelandic monk named Ganskog Nicholson, who supposedly filled it with evil magic, ultimately seeking to bend the devil to his will and rule the world. Yikes! Luckily, he didn't get his wish, and when he passed in 1520, the Grizzly Grimoire was buried with him. A couple of hundred years later, however, a shady Icelandic mage called Lufter heard about the book and wanted to learn its dark secrets himself. So he traveled to its burial place, a cathedral school in Haller, where Ganskog had been bishop. Now it gets really wild. According to the legend, Lufter managed to summon the departed monk's spirit and demanded he hand over the Raskina. His mission was almost a success when a student standing in the belfry noticed the ghoulish scene. Wasting no time, he rang the church bells, dissipating the spirit. Lufter fled but was taken by the sea on his journey home and dragged to the underworld in retaliation for his arrogance. As for the book, some say it was burned after the fiasco, but others are convinced it's still out there, maybe just waiting to be fished up like the Smuggler's Psalter. Now, I think it's fair to say most of this is probably just a myth, but I'm not gonna go looking for the Roskina to find out. Lady Luck can be a fickle mistress, but she can also be downright evil. Enter the curse of the great Omar. The what? Well, in the early 1900s, London bookbinding company Sangorsky and Sutcliffe decided to create a gorgeous version of a book by Edward Fitzgerald known as the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The bookbinders were passionate about the project, working hard until 1911 when they finally finished the manuscript. At first, it seemed the work had paid off. It was the most detailed, lavish, expensive book they'd ever created. I'm talking covered in over 1,000 jewels lavish. In a final symbol of excess, the cover was adorned with 3 peacocks representing royalty and earning it the nickname the Great Omar. But whilst peacocks are a symbol of royalty, their feathers are associated with bad luck. Sure enough, despite its beauty, Sangorsky and Sutcliffe found it maddeningly difficult to actually sell their creation. Eventually, the book was put up for auction and sold for £450, the equivalent of a whopping $76,500 today. Even so, this was less than half of what the bookbinders had hoped for. Anyway, the book was all set to be shipped off to its buyer in New York in a lovely new boat named the Titanic. Oh, yeah, the ship went down and the book sunk to the bottom of the sea where it remains to this day. Then, just a few weeks later, Sangorsky drowned while at the beach with his family. Damn. Sutcliffe, however, committed to making a second copy, one just as lavish. This time, he stored it in a secure vault in London. But guess what? It was destroyed during the Blitz of World War II. Jeez. Unsurprisingly, by this point, people suspected the book was cursed. Yet, in spite of all this bad fortune, Sutcliffe's nephew took it upon himself to finish a third version that has thus far avoided disaster and now resides in the British Library. Let's hope it stays there. Alright, so we've seen some pretty freaky books so far, but at least we could understand those ones. Back in 1912, Polish bibliophile Wilfrid Voynich discovered a book so mysterious that it still has people scratching their heads today. Now known as the Voynich Manuscript, Wilfrid found it in a college just outside Rome and was immediately struck by its oddness. It's not surprising that the entire 240-page document is written in an unknown language that has proven utterly indecipherable to this day. There's no credited author, and what's more, seriously strange illustrations adorn many of the pages. I'm talking extinct or made-up plants, strange organic machinery, and women in their birthday suits bathing in the plants. Alright, the wacky book has been dated back to the 15th century, but that's pretty much all we know for sure. Many have tried to decipher it, but none have succeeded. Some even believe the manuscript contains some kind of forbidden knowledge, and that cracking the code will cast a fatal curse on the codebreaker. Ugh, cursed or not, there's no doubt the whole situation is weird. Could it be a simple hoax? Did aliens visit and leave it behind? Or is it something else? Let me know what you think in the comments below. When it comes to books you should avoid reading, I bet you didn't think I'd mention a home remedy book, right? Yet, The Long Lost Friend, published in 1820, is just such a book, albeit with a few spells thrown in for good measure. You see, back in 1928, a Pennsylvanian witch convinced a local villager named John Blymer that he'd been cursed and told him the perpetrator was another local called Nelson Raymer. Apparently, he'd used a copy of The Long Lost Friend to perform the curse. At first, Blymer had rejected the witch. Raymer was a well-liked healer who'd even patched Blymer up in the past. But Raymer had been going through a period of bad luck, and the witch was convincing. So eventually, he accepted her words and set out to break the curse. Blymer and 2 of his friends broke into Raymer's house, took his life, and attempted to burn the house down with the book inside it. Geez, only the house didn't actually burn down, leading some to blame the power of the magical text inside. This only fueled the rumors that Raymer had been up to no good, something I'm sure the witch was happy about. Whether she'd actually believed Raymir to be malevolent or not, we can't be sure, but I reckon she had a grudge on him for some reason. Regardless, his old house still stands today and is spookily known as Hex Hollow. Even spookier, the clocks inside are all stopped at a minute past midnight, the exact time Nelson closed his eyes for good. As such, many consider the place haunted. If the legends are true, that fishy copy of the long-lost friend is still out there, maybe even in that same house. And no, I wouldn't try to find it. If you really want to read it, grab a copy with a less tainted history. As we've seen, messing around with old grimoires is generally a bad idea. If you believe the legends, possessions, hauntings, or even an early demise could await a reckless reader. The Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, however, is a 15th century spell book that could be far more dangerous for men than women. Girl power, am I right? Most magical texts from the time feature a combination of angelic and demonic magic, but this one is purely about the dark side. So you might imagine it'd be equally dangerous for everybody, regardless of gender. The thing is, one of the most powerful spells it contains involves creating a mirror of Lilith, used for conjuring the demon of the same name. According to Judaic and Mesopotamian mythology, Lilith was the first wife of Adam and was cast out from the Garden of Eden for not obeying her husband. From there on, she became a demon. As such, she can be pretty spiky, especially towards men who summon her without proper reason. I like to think I'm a hit with the ladies, but even I might struggle this time. The original manuscript is written in Latin and tucked away in Munich's Bavarian State Library, but you can check out a translated edition online if you do decide to read this book. Well, that's all for today. What do you think of these books? Are they really as dangerous as they say they are? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.